Hey, this is GatorX, and as we patiently await the next big Pokemon game for the Switch, I'm sure we're all looking forward to it looking amazing. Even though this isn't the first Pokemon game to be made with fully 3D models, it is the first brand new region in a main series game that will be on a screen larger than a postcard. But I've kind of been missing the usual sprites of Pokemon that we've come to know and love. I'm not going to sit here and rant about how the old times were better, but it does feel like something's lost with Pokemon when it makes the jump to 3D. I know you've probably heard that phrase before with Sonic the Hedgehog, but hear me out with this. Pokemon, being a game series that's primarily on the handheld consoles, kind of had to go with a sprite-based system. At least when it started out with the original Game Boy games, but would get slightly better with each iteration. Even into the era of the Nintendo DS, which was capable of having 3D games, Pokemon was still primarily sprite-based. There were some 3D elements to it definitely, especially with cutscenes that looked really cool, but for the most part, it still looked like a Pokemon game. And I'm not saying that X and Y Onward don't look like Pokemon games. I mean, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee definitely does look like one. But it was just very interesting to have a game released in 2011 still having very pixely looking graphics. Pixel graphics are something you normally see in classic games that had to do that because those were the limitations back then, or in pretentious indie games nowadays. There was always something so fascinating about seeing Pokemon in 3D because normally in the main series games and even other spin-offs on the handheld, Pokemon would be made out of pixels that you could literally count. They were charming and cutesy, but then when you finally see Pokemon in 3D models on any game, it was just really cool. The first game to have any sort of 3D Pokemon was Pokemon Snap, and of course, as we know, that's like the best spin-off game ever. And I feel like that's a reason why Colosseum was very much loved. Now, Colosseum wasn't a whole lot. What it mostly had was a cool story and some neat looking graphics. It wasn't a full Pokemon game, even though it still used basic Pokemon mechanics. There was a relatively small Pokedex, you were restricted in the Pokemon that you could catch, and there were no wild battles. Sounds familiar? But it definitely felt special because it was completely different to anything that we had seen on the handheld games. There was a distinct difference between them, and it's interesting with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee being the games after Ultra Sun and Moon, because there's more of a natural progression to that. And with the Switch basically being a handheld and home console all in one, it's going to be the home of the new Pokemon games, which are going to have all these 3D models and everything. And like I said, that's sort of the natural progression that Pokemon has been going with lately. You kind of figure why not, because now the handheld consoles are capable of producing some really good looking graphics. And again, these still look like Pokemon games, they don't look like they're something completely alien. But personally, I feel like Generation 4 and 5 were some of the best looking Pokemon games overall. Specifically Black and White and Black 2 and White 2, because those were the last games to be using actual sprites. This look, this style really communicates Pokemon to a lot of people, as these are most of the games that people have grown up with. And you see that in a lot of the fan games. Pokemon Uranium uses a style very similar to Black and White. Pokemon Prism is basically Crystal version with a lot more features and new story. Although these are fan games, so fans are limited in what they can produce as well. Although I feel like I'm getting a little lost, kind of back to my main point if there was really one. It's the fact that the Switch is the new home for the main series Pokemon games, and it's able to run some really good looking games. And spin-off games, like I've mentioned in a video like last year, just kind of aren't really the same. Basically, you only have Pokken, which looks much nicer than any other Pokemon game so far. And aside from that, every other spin-off game is a mobile game, which uses relatively simplistic looking graphics. Of course, Pokemon Go and Pokemon Duel do use 3D models, and that's mostly just because phones have gotten a lot better and can run even more. I'm not necessarily saying that we should be going back to sprites for Pokemon, but having the main Pokemon games using sprites and side games or anime or anything else having these 3D models or more fully rendered Pokemon was always really neat, because these are Pokemon that you get to see in your game that you get to play with as you bring the game with you wherever you want. And then you're given the opportunity to see these Pokemon fully realized. It just made it seem a little more special. But now that 3D modeled Pokemon are pretty much the norm, it's kind of lost its charm. Really, the only way that you could go even further is, like I said, in games like Pokken Tournament where they're a little better rendered, or in the movie Detective Pikachu where they look more realistic and fit in the real world. But even then, it's not necessarily being welcomed. But people have kind of come around to these designs. I definitely think that Generation 8 is going to wow us. The graphics are definitely going to be better than Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and in terms of like what we're going to be seeing for new regions and new Pokemon is definitely going to be amazing. I'm just wondering how well all of this is going to stay in this transition to 3D. Generation 8 is going to look great, but is the rest of Generation 8 going to look great later? Is Generation 9 going to be as timeless? And I think that's what works best about the sprite-based Pokemon games, specifically Diamond Pearl, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Black White, and Black 2 White 2. Their sprite graphics are a result of the limitations of the hardware as well as trying to stay faithful to the look of the original game at the same time. And in a way, they've become timeless. While games like X and Y and Sun and Moon look very, very dated. These are basically just my rambling thoughts on this topic, but what would be really neat to see in the future is if Game Freak releases a side Pokemon game that uses sprite-based graphics again. Maybe not the next Mystery Dungeon game going back to the original look, because that's also made the jump to 3D as well. But maybe if they have a new idea for some different type of spin-off game on the Switch, just throw it on the eShop, like a small title, and that could use some sort of sprite-based graphics. It would be a neat throwback and would be a cool way to shake things up. And again, to reiterate, Generation 8, I believe, is going to look really, really neat on the Switch. It's going to be one of the best looking Pokemon games, potentially. But I am really curious in how they're going to be able to make these graphics look distinctly Pokemon and timeless, in the same way that a lot of the sprite-based games were. But anyway, let me know what you think on the topic. Again, this is mostly some ramblings and not necessarily solid thoughts, but I think it's an interesting discussion that we could potentially have. Leave a comment below and we'll continue the discussion down there. If you enjoyed the content, remember to leave a like and subscribe to show your support. You can enable notifications by clicking the bell icon next to the subscribe button. This will make sure you see each new video as it comes out and will make you a member of the Chingling Squad. Anyway, this has been GatorX. Have a nice day.